Okay, so we start now. Hello and greetings, everyone. Today is the third of Afrolongevity educational program, and with us today is Dr. Aubrey de Grey. He is seen as um, the grandfather of 21st century longevity studies. And I'm not saying that based on, it's not a kind of a euphoria makeup, but because of his impact. Um, that we are gathered here today is because of his enormous support. He was at the beginning or the formative stage of Afrolongevity from TAFFD. He helped us to start the Afrolongevity project. He is even passionate about ensuring that the mission of longevity gets across all the continents. For those who don't know who he is, he co-founded the Methuselah Foundation in 2003, established the Science Research Foundation to advance rejuvenation biotechnology, and now serves as the Chief Science Officer of Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. Aubrey, I can't count the number of conferences he have attended and a lot of principles and theory. In fact, Professor Patricia de Alessio told me that in the early 2000s, late 90s, that Aubrey was organizing the only longevity conference in the world. I think she did mention Cambridge or thereabout, but it's a privilege for us to have him in our midst. I told you every question that you have about longevity, today you're going to ask him directly. Thank you so much, Aubrey, for being here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Josie, for inviting me. And above all, thank you, you and Brenda especially, and also all of your team for making Afrolongevity such a success over the past few years. Of course, there is plenty more to do, and you're doing it. You know, you are really demonstrating, you're justifying the faith that I had in you 3 or 4 years ago. You are really showing that you have the leadership qualities and the commitment and everything like that, which is so required for such a pioneering effort. I certainly strongly believe, as you just said, that Africa has a big role to play in the longevity movement. both now and in the future. As the longevity movement expands, of course, the exact emphasis of any particular contribution will change as the science moves forward and we come closer to distributing, disseminating these treatments. We will need a greater and greater emphasis on social change and modernization. And that's true in the West, it's true in Asia, and it's certainly true in Africa. So I know that you and Brenda and the rest of you are extremely aware of all of that. And I really salute the efforts that you have made and are making to enable Africa to play its full role in this global movement to defeat and control the world's biggest problem, the problem of aging. So I understand that today the main purpose is education. In other words, that most of the people here in the audience are relatively new to this discipline, especially to the science of aging and why it is even remotely reasonable to suppose that we might bring aging under comprehensive medical control in the foreseeable future, given how little progress we have made in the past few thousand years. So that's what I'm going to do. But since OC has told me that I have a whole hour, I'm going to make use of that by speaking for only maybe half an hour and then allowing an extensive time for discussion of what I've said and perhaps what I haven't said. I really want to make this a heavily interactive session where I can educate everyone here as much as possible. So in the first instance, I'm going to share my slides. Let me just make that happen. I think it's happened. I need to go like that. There we go. Somebody please confirm that my slides are visible and in full screen mode and all that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Rejuvenation by
Excellent. All right. Okay, so here goes.
there.
Great, thank you. All right, here goes. So the first thing I want to point out here is what's written on this slide, that I am a PhD and not an MD. In other words, I do not work on optimizing the delivery and benefit to humanity of things that we can already do. What I do is I do research. I oversee the development of new medicines that do not yet exist and that will do things that are far more effective against aging than anything that we have today. And of course, my goal is to hasten the development of those things, to make them come to fruition, come into reality as soon as possible. So I'm going to start with a question. This is a question that hardly anybody really asks, and that's a real problem, as you will see. Today, in South Africa, for example, and in the rest of Africa, there is still a big problem with HIV, but it is increasingly coming under control. And of course, the same can be said for malaria and other infectious diseases. In the Western world, the situation is even better. We have more or less eliminated the incidence of early death from any infections. Hardly any infections are really, killing a lot of people anymore. And, it's important to understand that it wasn't always that way. Even in the wealthiest countries in the world, if we go back 200 years, more than 1/3 of babies were dying before the age of 1. The average lifespan 200 years ago in, for example, the United Kingdom was less than 30. Now, the average lifespan in every single country in the world right now, even the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa, is more than 50, right? So that is, it's really important to get your head around how big an achievement that is, how much progress has been made. And of course, it's still going on. If you ask the question, what is the average lifespan across the whole world added together, all the rich countries and all the poor countries added together, it's now about 73 or 74. Even 20 years ago, it was like under 70, right? So progress is really rapid. But the problem is that the wealthiest countries that got to have a life expectancy of maybe 80, 50 years ago are still only about, 82, 83. Progress has stalled. And there's a fundamental reason for that, which is that the medicines that we have today are really good at combating infections and stopping people from dying from infections. But that's all that they're good at. The medicines that we have today are hopeless against the health problems of late life, the non-communicable diseases that so many people suffer if they were born a long time ago. And we just haven't figured out what to do about that. So that's the problem that I work on. And in order to work on any problem, you have to understand the question. So let's try and answer this question. Why do the medicines that work so well against infections, and of course I'm not even just talking about medicines, I'm talking about the realization that hygiene is a really good idea, I'm talking about mosquito nets, all of that. Why is none of that working against the health problems of late life? Now, a large part of why people don't ask this question is because they think they already know the answer. First of all, let me emphasize that you're not supposed to be able to read this slide. This slide is just for effect, right? It just emphasizes the fact, which you all knew already, that lots and lots of things go wrong late in life. And unlike infections, they all go wrong at more or less the same time, and they're progressive, they last a long time, so they exacerbate each other, right? They interact with each other. So most people think that this is the answer, that it's just complexity, that so much goes wrong late in life that, it has overwhelmed the medical profession. The medical profession has just been unable to get their arms around this problem. Now, for sure, that is part of the reason why the health problems of late life has been so resistant to medical intervention. But it's actually not the main reason. In order to describe and tell you what the main reason is, I'm going to take a small diversion and I'm going to ask a second question. I'm going to ask the question, in what ways can people be sick? Right? Now, if you ask people that question, and when I say people here, I don't just mean the general public, I mean specialists, I mean, biologists. You will almost always get an answer that looks very much like what I'm showing you on this table. People will say, well, there's infections. That's column one, communicable diseases. Then there are inherited diseases that a small number of people get from their parents because of the genes involved. And then there's the big one, the chronic diseases of late life, Alzheimer's disease, almost all cancers, atherosclerosis, osteoporosis, all of the things that I put up in ridiculously small font on the previous slide. And then almost everybody will say that way out in the stratosphere, there is this fourth way to be sick, which also only happens late in life, but which is completely different from diseases. And it consists of these rather poorly defined things like, frailty. What is frailty? Different people have different definitions, but the fact is it's kind of a catch-all. It means what you want it to mean. And so these are things which people lump under the heading of aging itself. And the key point is that the way in which people think about this incorporates that huge thick black line that I put in there. People think that the things in column 4 are just so different from diseases that they are implicitly off limits to medicine, even in principle. They think of them as like, woven into the fabric of the universe in some mystical way. And that's nonsense. So, in order to explain why it's nonsense, I'm going to step back a moment and give you a definition of aging. Now, first of all, I want to take a moment to alert you to the fact that it's insane, it's crazy that I would need to give you a definition of aging. I don't need to give you a definition of the color blue, or the country of Nigeria. These are things that have been around a long time. Aging has been around a long time. It's been around, it's been the major preoccupation of the human race since the beginning of civilization. So it is outrageous that there is no agreed definition of it. And honestly, we can talk about this later, but I believe that a large part of why there is no agreed definition is because people are so terrified of it that they don't think rationally about it. So that's not a good way to get shit done. So I believe that we need to start with a definition. And there are lots of options for what our definition might be. But I'm going to use this one, not only because it's correct, but also because it demystifies aging. It helps you to understand that aging is not a mystery. It's not some mystical thing. It really is. We do understand what aging is sufficiently well to be able to think rationally, as I will show you over the next 5 or 10 minutes, about how we might do something about it. So, what am I saying on this slide? I'm saying that aging is the combination of two processes. There's the process on the left, where metabolism creates damage, and that's a process that's literally lifelong. It starts before we're born. And then there's a process on the right, where damage creates pathologies. And that's a late life process. It doesn't kick off until the age of 50 or 60. So, in order to make sure that you understand what this definition really says, I'm going to talk a little bit about the meaning of those three words. Metabolism is simple. It's just the word that biologists use to denote the entire network of processes in the body that keeps us alive from one day to the next. So the normal working of the human body. Similarly, pathology is an easy thing to describe and to define. I'm just using that word to denote all of the things that go wrong with us late in life at the level of function. The decline in physical or mental function that happens late in life and that eventually kills us. So what's this thing damage? Well, I'm defining damage by this in this slide. Damage is everything that qualifies as that is an intermediate between metabolism and pathology. In other words, everything that is generated, self-inflicted, if you like, by our metabolism, and that accumulates during life, and that eventually, when there's too much of it, causes function to start to decline, and to decline more and more. The reason why the right-hand process only kicks off late in life is that the body is built to tolerate a certain amount of this damage, without any decline in function to speak of. But, the reason I'm using the word damage is because there is a threshold there. There is a certain amount of damage beyond which the body cannot just carry on going as well as it was before, and things start to go downhill. So this is all that aging is. And of course, this definition also lets me say what the goal that we have is. The goal of longevity research and longevity medicine. It is simply to separate metabolism from pathology. Simple, right? That's all we want to do. We want to keep people alive without having them get sick. All right. So now let me come back to the table I put up a moment ago. This is a corrected version of it. I didn't emphasize, but I will emphasize now, that the previous version had one huge, massive mistake in it. Now, what was that mistake? Well, if you look closely at this table, you will see that all the columns, all four columns, are exactly the same as they were before. The only difference that I have introduced here is that I have shifted the big thick black line. It was previously between columns 3 and 4, and now it's between columns 2 and 3. So why am I making such a big deal about that? Well, moving the black line does two things. The first thing it does is it provides the answer to the question that I began the talk with right on the first slide. It tells us that we should not be remotely surprised that the medicines that have been so successful in the last 200 years in combating the things in column 1 do not work on the things in column 3. They are fundamentally different phenomena. The things in column 1 are caused by an external source, an infection, a microbe, and so on. The things in column 3 are self-inflicted. They are generated as a consequence of being alive in the first place. But the other thing that moving the big thick black line tells you, which is perhaps even more important, is that there is no meaningful difference between column 3 and column 4. That really the difference is only semantic. That the things in column 3 are the aspects of aging that we have chosen to give disease-like names to. Honestly, I really mean it. I'm not exaggerating. That's the only difference. And that's very useful because it means that we remove any temptation that we might have to regard the things in column 4 as being somehow off limits to medicine. Because we've already decided, nobody's going to tell you that the things in column 3 are off limits to medicine. Those are definitely things that we're trying very hard worldwide to bring under medical control. So this helps to understand that the things in column 4 are just the same. We can bring all of that under medical control. It's just that we don't yet know how. All right, so why is it so important for me to have spelt out what people get wrong when they try to classify sickness? The answer is because if you make that mistake, if you kind of think implicitly of the problems of late life as if they were more or less the same as infections, then what you're going to do is you're going to try and cure them. You're going to try and eliminate them from the attack them directly and eliminate them from the body. That's what geriatrics is, geriatric medicine. It says basically, yes, our goal is to separate metabolism from pathology. And the way we're going to do it is we're just going to ignore these intermediates called damage. We're just going to hack away at the pathologies themselves and eliminate them as best we can. Now, a child could see that that's never going to work, right? That the damage of late life is inevitably going to continue to accumulate if we ignore it, and therefore that anything that attacks the consequences of damage is going to become progressively more, ineffective as time goes on. And that's, of course, exactly what we see. But that has not stopped society, humanity, from continuing to spend billions and billions of dollars trying to attack these pathologies and cure them when it's impossible. It's completely tragic. It's ridiculous. Now, I'm not the first person to figure that out. I am by no means the first person. It was more than a century ago when people started to realize that actually separating metabolism from pathology by separating damage from pathology was never going to work. And they said, well, right, instead we can separate metabolism from pathology by separating metabolism from damage. You can think of it as making the body run more cleanly, if you like, making it generate damage at a slower rate than it naturally does. And that would be great, right? It means it would delay the point at which there is so much damage that we start to get sick. And, people tried hard, for a long time. But unfortunately, we have this problem. Metabolism is really, 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 really complicated. What I'm showing you here is, I'm afraid, a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works, how metabolism works. And, any of you who have ever written software will immediately be able to look at this and say, well, this is the absolute nightmare of uncommented spaghetti code. There is no way on God's earth that we would ever be able to disentangle this and to stop metabolism from doing the thing we don't want it to do, which is to create damage, without at the same time stopping it from doing things we need it to do to keep us alive. It's just not going to happen. And of course, I'm even like understating the problem here, because the real problem is how little we know about how metabolism works. The stuff that we don't know is even more daunting. But luckily, there's a third option here. I'm calling it the maintenance approach, preventative maintenance. That says there's a third way to separate metabolism from pathology. What we can do is ignore both of the processes that combine to define aging. Instead, we can separate those two processes from each other by periodically going in and eliminating that damage, removing that damage from the body, so that even though the damage is being created at the natural rate by metabolism, nevertheless, it does not get to the level of abundance that makes us sick. This is a spectacularly simple idea. It's astonishing to me to this day that nobody had really put this forward as a way to go until I did about 25 years ago. But here we are. Now, calling it the common sense alternative, it might sound a little arrogant, but the thing is, it is common sense because we already do it. Look at this, right? This is a car that's more than 100 years old. And it was not built to last 100 years. It was designed to last maybe 10 years, but it has benefited from an unusually thorough amount of preventative maintenance throughout its life, and that works. Preventative maintenance completely transcends anything that we might think of as a warranty period on a machine. And the fact is, the human body is a machine. It's a very, 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 very complicated machine, but it's still a machine, and therefore its function is determined by its structure and composition, by what it's made of. So if we can do preventative maintenance, which means simply restoring the structure and composition of the body to something like how it was at a younger age, then we will have the same effect. We will extend the healthy and total longevity of that machine, the human body. So, this is a really useful insight because it sidesteps all of our ignorance about how metabolism generates damage, or for that matter, how damage generates pathology. But of course, what it does not sidestep is the nature of damage itself. In order to be able to do this preventative maintenance, you have to know what your target is, what your targets are, the various types of damage that happen, the types of change to the structure and composition of the body. It's only when you do that that you can start thinking about how to implement this maintenance approach. And so that's what I did 25 years ago. I put forward a classification of damage. Because the human body is so complicated, it does an awful lot of types of damage to itself. But we can classify those many things into this rather manageable number of categories, just 7 categories, and those are the things on the left. On the right, we have a bunch of corresponding treatments. And that's the point, right? That's why this classification is useful. For every thing on the left, there may be many examples within the category, but they are all amenable to the same kind of intervention. So for illustration, let me just talk about the first one. Cell loss, what is that? That's simply cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells. And, that happens in various different places in the body. A very important one is a part of the brain called the substantia nigra, where there are particular types of neuron, they're called dopaminergic neurons, and they die at a much more rapid rate than other neurons in the brain. And sure enough, that's bad for you. It causes Parkinson's disease in old age. So, there are other cases, like the thymus, for example, which definitely loses cells earlier in life. And again, that has a bad effect. What do we do? Well, the natural approach is stem cells. We put cells into the relevant part of the body that know what to do, to divide and replace the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. And sure enough, this works. At the moment, there are 5 clinical trials going on around the world doing exactly this, using stem cells to treat Parkinson's disease. And everyone's quite optimistic. I won't go through all the rest in the interest of time, but let me just say that some of these, most of these, were actually really just, theoretical 25 years ago, but that's not true anymore. All of them have moved forward far enough that they're being pursued in actual startup companies in the private sector, not even just in academia. So that's very good news. And what's even better is that this is now an accepted way of looking at the problem of aging and how we might solve it. When I first put this idea forward, it was actually very controversial. It was a big paradigm shift, and I had to withstand quite a lot of acrimony among the community. But over the years, people understood what I was saying and understood that it made sense. And in 2013, a paper came out that essentially restated what I had said more than a decade earlier, and which became very rapidly the most highly cited paper in the whole of the biology of aging this century. And it will certainly stay that way. This is now the Bible of the field. So, by that time, it was an idea whose time had come. And that's really great news. So, what are we doing? Well, I'm just going to spend a few more minutes talking about what we do at LEV Foundation. If you think about what I've said so far, this approach to bringing aging under medical control is a divide and conquer approach. We have to do a whole bunch of different things to the same people at the same time. And, when you have any kind of divide and conquer approach in any branch of technology, it comes in 2 phases. You've got the phase where you develop the components of the divide and conquer technology, and you've got the phase where you put them together into, the composite that is supposed to achieve the function that you were aiming for. Now, in general, in engineering, that second part, the putting together, is the easy part. If the bits work, you can be pretty sure that the combination is going to do the job that you intended. But in medicine, it's not like that at all, because we're working with this system that we have such a pitifully poor understanding of. You can get plenty of surprises at that second step. So I've been desperate for many years to move to that second step. But of course, you can't do that until you've got at least some of the components working so that you can tinker, you can experiment and see what happens. And that became true maybe 4 or 5 years ago, no longer. So back then, I was able to put together a bit of money about 3 years ago and do a very large experiment with 1,000 mice and to combine 4 things, each of which other research groups had demonstrated success with. In each of these cases, it had been shown that you could take mice that were already in middle age, and you could extend their life by doing these things. Middle age means about 1.5 years old. The mice normally live to about 2.5. And in some cases, you can get a few months of additional life this way with individual treatments. So what we wanted to try and get, and what we still want to try and get, is a lot more than that. We want to give them 12 months of additional life. And we believe that eventually we're going to be able to do that by combining things that each individually give a bit. That's what we're trying to do. And of course, we're measuring health as well. So, well, it basically works. This is what we got in that experiment, which ended earlier this year. The big, thick blue line is normal mice that are not getting any treatments. And the thick red line is the mice that were getting all 4 of the treatments that we used. This is called, for those of you who don't know, this is called a Kaplan-Meier curve. So what we have here is on the x-axis, the age of the mice, starting at 580 days, which is about 1.5 years old. That's when we began the experiment. And then on the y-axis is the proportion of the mice that we began with that are still alive at this or that age. So obviously the curves all move down and to the right. As you can see, the mice that got these treatments did a few months better than the mice that didn't. And that was what we were hoping for. But what we really wanted was to get a big effect, to get 12 months, and we certainly did not get that. However, what's good news is that we also had these other treatment groups. As you can see, we had 8 other treatment groups, and those groups got some, but not all, of the treatments. And they're somewhere in the middle, as you can see, which is great. It means that we are obtaining additivity. We are getting more effect from combining these treatments than if we only use one at a time. The male mice were a bit more complicated, but basically the same story. As I say, we measured health a great deal as well, in many, many different ways. In the interest of time, I won't go through that right now, but yeah, we did a lot of different things. These are measures of mouse health that have been developed by other research groups over many decades, so we didn't have to invent any of this. But because we didn't get 12 months that we wanted, we want to keep going. And we believe that the right way to keep going is to use more treatments. So this next experiment that we're going to do, as soon as we can raise the money for it, will be twice as big as the previous one. We want to put 8 interventions together. You can see that we have maybe 12 interventions, maybe 13, 14 listed on this slide. We expect that we will use 8 of them. And we've been while I've been desperately trying to raise the money for this experiment, we have been refining and refining it. So we will be able to do a pretty damn good experiment. A piece of really good news that I want to not forget to say is that most of the treatments that you're seeing here have only recently been discovered, very recently, like during the time that we were doing the first experiment. So that's insanely good news. That means that we've got a lot of choice of what things to put together to get a big, big increase in mouse lifespan. I could talk a little bit about the AI agent that has been created, a chatbot that you can talk to, and it gives answers that are pretty much the answers I would give. It's really cool. It's got fantastic graphics, I have to say. For those of you who are familiar with what I look like, I'm really impressed with all of this. So I will stop there and just thank everybody who has allowed this to happen by donating financially to it. I will also highlight the review paper that we published last year, that explains the nature of this study, the motivation for it, and a lot of details about it. And of course, there's the QR code for our donate page. So thank you very much. And I think I have succeeded in speaking for not much more than half an hour. So I would be very happy to stop sharing my slides and to talk with all of you and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Aubrey. You always find a way to simplify everything. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to learn more from you and then find ways of doing things better here in Africa. I cannot be you, I can be myself, but there are a lot of things that I need to learn from you. Thank you. It's time for interaction. Questions, raise your hand, and then you ask your question. Meantime, I would like to recognize the presence of our CEO. Brenda is here with us. Before we ask our questions, Brenda, please, would like you to say one or two things. Brenda? I'm not talking to you, sir. Okay, questions, please.
The right thing for you to do right now, OC, is to break the ice by thinking of your own question.
Come again, please. I didn't get that.
I just said, since everybody is being shy, you must break the ice by coming up with your own question.
Okay, okay. There are a lot of confusion when we talk about aging. and write in your book, Ending Aging. I think you are a little bit shifting with your definition of aging. And when we say aging is a disease, and a lot of people ask me that initially you said aging is a disease. And what do you mean when you say aging is a disease? Recently, a new Chinese company just said, oh, we're producing a pill, a medication that will stop aging and that will make you live 150 years. So now you are talking about aging as pathology. So a lot of people ask, what do you mean when you say aging is a disease? Is it a one-time thing or what you have to manage?
All right. So I'm fairly sure that I have never actually said that aging is a disease. I have always avoided saying that, even in my book from a long time ago, because it's a dangerous thing to say. If you say that aging is a disease, then you are kind of encouraging people to make the mistake that I talked about early on in my talk, of thinking that the things in column 3 of that table are amenable to the same kind of interventions as the things in column 1. So what I say instead is I say aging is a medical problem. That means that it's a problem that's amenable to medicine in principle, that it's going to be possible soon in the end to develop medicines that combat aging, but that calling it a disease kind of has too much baggage to it. I prefer not to call it a disease. In fact, in an ideal world, we would not call Alzheimer's disease a disease because it isn't. It's really just part of aging that we've chosen to give a disease-like name to. And I think if we remember that, then we can maintain much more clarity and rigor around our thinking of what we're supposed to be doing about aging.
Okay. Okay, that makes a lot of sense because I tried to borrow some of your construct in explaining what aging is. Okay, Okonkwo Ifunanya, you can ask your question before I continue.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, depending on your time zone. Nice presentation by Professor Aubrey. Professor Aubrey, I must say that I'm honored to be a beneficiary of your lecture. Thank you so much, Prof. I just have a very simple question to ask. And the question is, Prof, at what age do you think is appropriate for human beings to stop living? Thank you.
So, of course, I have heard this question a lot over the years, and I have tried to answer it respectfully over the years, and it never works. So these days I answer it with a bit of a joke. I have a question for you. What time do you want to go to the toilet next Sunday? Now, you may not immediately understand why that is a good answer to your question. So let me explain. The fact is, we all know that that's a stupid question. But the thing is, we also all know why it's a stupid question. The fact is, it's a stupid question because we all know that we're going to have better information on that topic nearer the time, right? We're going to know more about what time we want to go to the toilet when we wake up that same day, right? And we're going to be able to act on that information. So it's ridiculous to have an opinion today about what time we want to go to the toilet next Sunday. No, it's exactly the same. Having an opinion today at the age of 30 or 40 or 50 or 62, the way I am, about how long one wants to live or how long it's appropriate for people to live makes no sense. The fact is, first, we know two things, fundamental things about the nature of the human condition. Number one is nobody ever wants to become sick. Everybody wants to stay healthy. That's true however long ago they were born. And secondly, we know that healthy people don't tend to die very soon. They tend to stay alive. And indeed, they tend to stay healthy, right? So what's going on there? It's just a case of like taking one day at a time, 1 year at a time. of course, it's also a case of investing in the longer term, improving one's chances of not getting sick 10 years from now. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the same thing. How long ago one was born has no bearing, either practically or emotionally or ethically, on how long one should live in the future. Some people would say that how healthy one is today also has no bearing on that. I don't really agree with that, because the fact is, the sicker you are, the harder it is to keep you going, and the less you're getting out of life anyway. But if we can take people who are already sick and restore them to health, so much the better. Either way, though, how long ago you were born doesn't factor into this at all.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Prof. Very well
Thank you.
understood. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Christian User. Christian, you can ask your question.
All right. Thank you so much. My question is on the aging in 3 words. So I would like to know more on particularly on the damage. And also the second question would be, how can we keep people alive for them not to fall sick?
I didn't catch the end of your question. How come we keep people alive? What?
Yeah, as a human being made of both biological and medical. So how can we keep them alive without them falling sick?
Okay, so I come back to the key point that I began with. The body is a machine. The body is an entity whose function is determined by its structure. That means both physical function and mental function. And that means that if we restore the composition of the body, the structure of the body, if we replace cells that are not being replaced on their own, if we remove waste products that the body is not excreting on its own, if we restore the elasticity of our arteries that get progressively stiffer, if we remove cancer cells, for example, all of these things amount to restoring the body's structure to something like how it was before. And if we do that, then the body's function will also be restored and maintained. So that's the entire philosophy of what I've been saying.
Okay. Yeah, Victor Uka, I'm sorry. I want to ask some questions, then we interject. So my questions, I have some bugging questions that I've written down. There are 10 that I wanted to ask Aubrey today. And one of them is that, Prof, the CN model that you've outlined focuses on repairing the 7 categories of age-related damages, given that most African health systems still operate on curative, not preventative models. How can we practically integrate rejuvenation biotechnologies into lower resource healthcare framework without widening inequality?
Okay, so there's a couple of questions. I want to unpack that question a bit. The first thing is, why should we move in the direction of prevention? The fundamental answer is, first of all, it would be quite nice if people didn't get sick in the first place. But the second part of this is that prevention is a hard sell. People are inherently scared of medicine. They don't really like going to the doctor or the hospital. And when they're not yet sick, they very often think about this question as a kind of trade-off. If they go to the hospital, they might become sick. And this is a dangerous way to think. But it's very common in all countries around the world. People are just very bad at reasoning about probabilities and uncertainties. And so they end up, not doing what they ought to do, being overly risk averse. And the medical profession is part of that problem. For centuries, the medical profession has followed the principle of what's called first do no harm, which basically means stick with treating people. Don't do preventative medicine because you might have some remote chance of doing harm, and you won't do any immediate good because the person isn't yet sick. It's a really, really damaging way to think, but it's the way that people do think. Now, the second part of your question was about inequality. And there I can give a much clearer answer, because the fact is, it's not a psychological thing here. It's a practical economic thing. At the moment, we have this, terrible situation where the large majority of the budget of the whole world, the medical budget, is spent on the health problems of late life. Of course, in the West, the margin is even bigger. It's maybe 80 or 90% of the medical budget. But even in sub-Saharan Africa, it's still now the biggest thing. African countries spend more money on the health problems of late life than they do on HIV or malaria. It's a big deal, which means that as and when these treatments that work to stop people from getting sick when they get old, as and when those treatments arrive, it will be an economic imperative, an economic necessity for countries to ensure that those treatments are made available to everybody who is old enough to need them, whether or not those people can pay. If countries don't do that, those countries will spend much more money on keeping sick people alive than they would have spent on keeping older people healthy. And that is not what governments like to do. Governments like to spend as little money as possible. So the idea that this will somehow be limited by ability to pay and that it will increase inequality and so on is completely misguided. It's completely wrong. I understand why people do think that. People think it because they make an analogy with other new technologies, which do tend to be limited by ability to pay at first. But this isn't like that, because the economic necessity does not apply. Now, somebody in the chat said that I'm using a lot of figurative language, and I'm going to complain about that a little bit, because the fact is, I'm doing the opposite. A huge part of the problem about the discussion of aging in the wider world is that too many people do use figurative language. They don't define what they mean, especially they don't define what they mean by the word aging. And so if anyone thinks that I am using figurative language, then I would invite you to compare what I've said with what other people say. I am precisely aiming to demystify the question here. All right, I'm ready for the next question.
Thank you so much. Victor Oka, can you ask your question before I continue my other questions?
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aubrey, de Grey, to our host, and to every other person listening. So, I just have a question, and that question goes thus, for people born with congenital conditions, what hope do they have when it comes to regenerative medicine? Thank you.
So you were a bit unclear there, but I think I understood the question. You're asking what is the potential for treating congenital conditions? Now, I have some very good news about that. The medicines that we are in the process of developing to attack aging are actually going to be very effective against a wide range of congenital conditions as well. That's because congenital conditions normally manifest as an accelerated rate of accumulation of one or another of the types of damage that happens at a slow rate in all of us. So in other words, the condition will be amenable to the same kind of repair technology as we would use in combination with other technologies for people who are getting old. Not only that, it turns out that this makes economic sense. In the West especially, there is a very strict regulatory regime, as I'm sure you know, for the process of making a treatment available to be prescribed, making it what's called approved. And very often, it turns out that the easiest way to get something approved, even if one's goal is to treat some aspect of aging, the easiest way is to go after a congenital disease that is characterized by an accelerated accumulation of the same kind of damage that the treatment is going after. And investors like this. Investors like to make money quickly. So many companies now are doing exactly this. They are developing a treatment for the ultimate purpose of addressing aging, but they use it initially on a congenital disease, and that's how they get it approved. That's how they start getting revenue. That's how they start to get more investment so that they can move forward in what's called label expand to use on other conditions.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think being in Cyber, you can ask your question. I'm sorry if I did mispronounce your name.
There's a question in the chat from Daniel Obij. He says, is it possible to
thank
do...
you, sir. No, it's not pronounced my name wrong.
He says, is it possible to do preventative medicine without medical practitioners? Well, honestly, this is kind of a definition of the word medicine. For sure, there is plenty that people can do without medicine to postpone how soon they suffer from the health problems of late life. But unfortunately, the magnitude of that benefit is not very impressive. You might be able to postpone the health problems of late life by a year or two. If you are particularly predisposed to get one or another problem, then you might be able to do more because that problem might kill you early, if you like, and you might be able to postpone that. But most people, everything goes wrong at more or less the same time, as I was saying earlier. So it's good, but it's not very good. It's not good enough. And, this is often overlooked. This is often, swept under the carpet. The same questioner also says, do painkillers have an adverse effect? Honestly, I wouldn't say so. In fact, it's well known that low doses of aspirin have a beneficial effect on heart disease. Of course, exactly who this benefits is dependent on things like diet, and also one's genes, like one's ApoE genotype, for example. But this is generally beneficial, or at least that's what most people think. Then Sonny Offer asks a very important question. Are there some age-related types of damage that are more difficult to repair than others? Oh, yes, very much so. And in fact, that has been the fact that has guided my work over the past 20 years. When I first came up with this classification that I put up on during the talk, I emphasized this, that the first one, cell loss, was actually doing pretty well already. There was a lot of progress going on in developing stem cell therapies. And of course, there's been a hell of a lot more progress since then. But some of them were much harder. And in fact, right now, we still have a couple of them that we've made progress, but not enough progress so that we could even make them work in mice. So there's still a lot more to do. The work that we're doing at LEV Foundation, combining things that do work in mice, is, just the start. We are seeing how much we can achieve, but there are other things that definitely still need more work because they don't even work in mice yet.
Okay.
There's a similar question from Jimo, says, like, are there any particular interventions that show the most promise for translation to human therapies? And yes, there are. I think I mentioned that stem cell therapies are already being used for Parkinson's disease. It's not that they're not approved yet, but they're in clinical trials. There are quite a few other conditions that stem cell therapies are being used for. And there are also clinical trials going on to address some of the other types of damage. For example, the removal of what are called senescent cells, and indeed the killing of cancer. You know, lots of things are going on now that are very much in clinical trials. So the only question is, how soon will they all be working, or most of them, so that we can start addressing aging itself rather than only addressing specific conditions?
Okay. I think this guy asked a question. Bean, can you ask your question now?
Good evening to everyone. Professor, my question goes about aging, about the medication. So I wish to ask, is there a possibility to help reduce diseases from the food we eat, from what we eat? For me, I think, I believe, that's my belief, that some of these pharmaceutical industries, most of them, they're out for profit making. So is there a possibility for us to control what we eat, our diet, what we take? Will it help to ameliorate or to play a key role in the aging process? Thank you.
Okay, so let me answer. There are really two questions there, so I'm going to answer them separately. With regard to food, absolutely. You know, one of the ways to shorten your life is to have a bad diet. You know, and to get seriously overweight and short of micronutrients. Absolutely, having a good diet is very important. But beyond that, the amount you can do by eating particular foods or by adopting a particular regime, like a keto diet, for example, very little really. You might be able to do a little bit, but if you're basically already living the way your mother told you to, there's not much more you can do with food, or indeed with lifestyle of any other kind. Now, the second part of your question is about the profit motive of the pharmaceutical industry, or indeed the medical industry more generally. Now, of course, they're into making money. You know, everybody who works in the private sector is into making money. I don't have a problem with that. I want people to get these treatments developed and distributed as soon as possible. And if some people make money out of it, that's fine. I do, however, want to emphasize and to highlight one mistake that people often make in this regard. A lot of people say, well, the medical industry is against preventative medicine because they make their money out of keeping sick people alive, and if people aren't getting sick, they won't make so much money. That's not true. It's true today because of the absence of preventative medicine, and in particular because of the lack of enthusiasm for preventative medicine that exists among the general public. At the end of the day, it's all about the public. The reason why the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry is focused on treatment rather than prevention is because that's where the demand is. But I want us to change that. I want us to create a world in which most people understand the value of preventative medicine and are willing to pay for it, whether themselves or whether through taxpayers' money or whatever. And once that happens, I assure you that the medical industry will be perfectly happy to follow the money and to focus on delivering what the public are demanding, just as they do today.
Okay, thank you so much. I continue with my question and for the conversation. Your framework emphasizes more on metabolic repair and mitochondria restoration. Now, you come to Africa. Africa's biodiversity offers nutrient phytonutrient rich plants rarely studied globally. So what research pathways could bridge indigenous food system with the molecular repair principle of science?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the most important part of your question is not so much what we can do for Africa, but rather what Africa can do for the rest of the world in this regard.
Yes.
There's a big reason why in Africa there's not so much diabetes as there is in the West. It's simply because of what you just said about the availability of other types of food. You know, a lot of the areas of the world where diabetes is worst are not the most affluent, the wealthiest nations. They are the nations that have recently become wealthy. We see this in the Middle East, for example. And that's because they suddenly discover McDonald's and they love it. And they stop doing what they used to do, eating a varied diet. You know, we need to fix that. We need to make sure that people people in the West and elsewhere are educated to understand the benefits that can arise from the variety of dietary components that exist in a place in the continent of Africa. And of course, the continent of Africa is not homogeneous. Different countries have different diets, different things they eat, different nutrients, different micronutrients. All of this has enormous value. As I said earlier, if you are already behaving the way your mother told you to, then the magnitude of the benefit you can get from this kind of thing will be relatively small, but everything's better than nothing.
Yeah. So I want to, because we are here, we are raising missionaries for longevity in Africa. We have people from different countries in this meeting, people from different states. I'm going to ask a question now based on a triadic question that interlinks data gap, biomarker development, and socioeconomic priorities. So most biomarker data sets driving longevity science comes from Western populations. So how can we develop Africa-specific aging biomarkers and biobanks that captures genetic, epigenetic, and environmental diversity without replicating Western dependency model? And
yeah, it's a huge problem. And actually, the problem exists in other ways as well. One thing that's a big topic of conversation in the research community right now is that a lot of studies have been done only on men, not on women. Certainly also in the West, a lot of studies have only been done on Caucasians and not on Afro-Americans, even though, there are plenty of Afro-Americans in America, for example, right? There's really no excuse. This has happened, because people haven't really been prioritizing diversity in the patients that they look at. But the good news is that everyone in the field now recognizes that this is a big shortcoming. So I don't think you should be using the term African specific. Rather the opposite. We should be saying we want to generalize across the whole world. We want to include African samples, African blood samples, for example, in the same studies that are also including Western samples, so that the results that come out, the biological markers, the measures of biological age and so on, can be applied universally across the whole world.
Okay, thank you so very much. So Okonkwo, please, before you ask your question, permit me to, because I'm trying to get something out of this. We are taking notes. We're going to work on these questions. So in a continent where infectious and nutritional disease is still dominant, how can we justify funding age reversal research when most policies are built around survival and not vitality? How would you frame longevity science as an economic investment, not a luxury?
Well, so the simplest answer to that question is that your premise is simply no longer true. The number one medical problem in Africa is aging. That is true for any country that has an average lifespan above 50. And every single country in the world, including every single country in sub-Saharan Africa, now has an average lifespan above 50. So even though the health problems of early life still get most of the attention, most of the headlines, they, at this point, from an economic perspective, are not the number one problem. Now, one could argue that even if they're not even if it's number one problem, economically, it's still really not the number one problem morally, that somehow younger people matter more. I don't like that. I think that, a long time ago, a colleague of mine invented the term ageism, which is, by analogy with sexism and racism and so on, right? It's unjustified bias against people who were born a long time ago. As far as I'm concerned, however long ago you were born, you're still a human being. You're still just as entitled to medical care as you were if you were born recently. So I want to see that being the attitude, that we need to address everyone. The other thing that's really important to say is that this is not a zero-sum game. We see, for example, the Gates Foundation putting quite a lot of money into addressing infections in sub-Saharan Africa, buying large numbers of mosquito nets, things like that, right? And that's fantastic. I have never tried to persuade Bill Gates not to do that. I think it's fantastic. But the fact is, we need that done, and we also need to address the health problems of late life. And different people, different sources of money, whether it's philanthropists, whether it's governments, are going to provide, they're going to have more different priorities because they're going to choose their priorities, for personal reasons. So we really don't have a problem of having to choose between one priority or another.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okonkwo, please ask your question. Then after Okonkwo, Chinechere.
Okay. Prof, my question is, in all your years of longevity journey, have you ever come across religion extremists that may argue that longevity activists are trying to play God? And if you have come across such people, how do you respond to such argument? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. When I started out 20 or more years ago, I was very much expecting to encounter a lot of that. And I was quite surprised at how little of it I have actually encountered. I now think that the reason why I don't get very much of that is because the answer to it is so obvious and so unarguable. The answer is simply that this is God's work, that Holy Scripture, whether it's Christian, Hindu, Muslim, whatever, Holy Scripture is very clear that what we are supposed to be doing with our lives is minimizing suffering, minimizing other people's suffering. And there is no question that aging causes far, far more suffering across the whole world than anything else, absolutely anything else. So it is immoral not to be doing this work. Furthermore, if we focus on the question of lifespan rather than on the question of health, then people say, we'll be playing God by making people live longer. Well, you know what? Last I checked, God was supposed to be omnipotent, which means that God can perfectly well strike you down with a thunderbolt however healthy you are. So that doesn't come into it. We're not subverting God's plan because God can do what God likes to maintain his plan. And then the third thing is, from a religious perspective, our nature, human nature, is the way that God chose it to be. And one aspect of human nature is that we have the motivation, the desire to improve our world, to make the world a better place where we get a higher quality of life. Therefore, saying, well, we shouldn't do this, that's unnatural. What's natural is to behave the way that God built us and to try our best to develop new technologies, including medical technologies, that improve our world.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chinechem, please ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, Prof. So I have like 4 questions. The first one is, does intermittent fasting, like prolonged fasting, fasting from 24 hours to 72 hours, does it play a role in reducing aging and increasing longevity? How does it do that?
So
Then
I'm
the
going
second
to
question.
I'm going to make you ask your questions one at a time because I'm very bad at answering multiple questions. So I'm going to answer that one first, and then I'll have you back.
Okay, sir.
Well, intermittent fasting is one variation on the general theme of calorie restriction. You just have fewer calories coming into your body. And there are, in fact, drugs now, such as rapamycin, which kind of also do the same kind of thing. They trick the body into thinking that you're not eating as much as you would like, even if you actually are. So all of these things work in basically the same way. They they activate a whole bunch of changes to the way that our metabolism works that do alter the rate at which damage accumulates in the body. And the reason this happens is because, of course, lack of food, famine, is a real thing that happens in the wild, and it always has happened. So we have evolved, and all species have evolved, to optimize for that, to switch to a different kind of metabolism in order to maximize the opportunity to pass their genes on to the next generation. It makes sense, basically, because if you have offspring during a famine, then your offspring are likely to die of starvation before they have their own offspring. So it was a waste of effort, so to speak. And it's better to delay having offspring, which helps you to delay aging. So that sounds great. But here's the bad news. Long famines don't happen in nature as often as short famines. And that means that the evolutionary selective pressure to do this, to respond with one's metabolism, is weaker for long famines than for short famines. And unfortunately, what that means is that this whole phenomenon of benefiting from eating less has a much smaller effect for long-lived species like human beings than it does for short-lived species like mice. So in mice, sure, you can get a big, like 30 or 40% increase in lifespan by this kind of approach. And as I say, it doesn't really matter whether you do it intermittently or whether you do it continuously. The reason intermittent fasting is a big topic of conversation is really just because it's easier for people to do than continuous fasting. It's good, but it's not good enough. It's not going to really be the holy grail against aging. Second question.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Then the second question is, why do women come down with aging diseases earlier in age than the men? Example, arthritis, osteoporosis, and the rest. Why is it that women come down with these easily at early age than the men?
So I can give a very simple answer to that question. I have no idea. And I'm not the only one. We really don't know. It's a big research topic. We know that there are quite substantial differences between men and women in metabolism, in like levels of different hormones and so on. Of course, the biggest one is menopause, right? But the mechanism why that seems to have this effect that you just described, that women on the one hand, they seem to get sick at a younger age. Secondly, they stay alive in a poor state of health for a longer amount of time than men. We really don't know. And what we can say is that the differences between men and women, human men and women, are tiny when compared to the differences we see in some other species. It's astonishing how long some insects, female insects, live relative to male insects, for example. So it's a big deal. We don't know. We'd love to know more, but at the moment, we just want both men and women to live longer.
Thank you very much, sir. My third question, you answered it when you were answering the first one. So that's all, sir. I
Great.
understood it. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked a question here from Loretta. Stephen, um, what is what again? What is basically the cause of infertility among most women?
So I assume this means the cause, C-A-U-S-E. Well, of course, fertility is a big question. So the biggest thing that this question refers to is menopause. We know at the basic level what menopause is caused by. It's caused by the fact that the ovary does not make new egg cells during life. All of the egg cells that a woman has early in life are ones they were born with. And women lose those cells throughout life, and when there are none left, then we have this phenomenon called menopause, where the ovary basically atrophies. Why that happens, another really good question that we really don't know the answer to. And the reason it's such a mystery is because most species do not have menopause. They either they continue to make egg cells throughout life, or they just have enough of them that they don't run out in anything like a currently normal lifetime. Then there are other kinds of things impacting fertility. One very interesting one is the immune system. It turns out that for fertility purposes, it's good to have a weak immune system because the immune system tries to actually eliminate the fetus during pregnancy because, of course, the fetus is genetically different from the mother. And the fetus has a bunch of mechanisms to stop that from happening, but those mechanisms don't always work. So it's actually good to have a weak immune system if you want to have a lot of kids. And as time's gone on during the past couple of 100 years, and we have more modern medicine that allows people to survive when they have a weak immune system and not to die in childhood, there has been a big shift in humanity, in the population, so that we don't get so much rejection. So yeah, fertility is a big, complicated topic. Often people also are interested in male fertility, which has been a lot more research on. But yeah, all of this is a big research topic.
Great. The last question from the chat. Is cancer really a genetic disease?
So yes, in multiple different ways. Cancer is caused by, overwhelmingly, by mutations, by spontaneous changes to our DNA, which cause the cell to ignore signals that tell it not to divide. The body is full of cells that are constantly telling each other not to divide. And when those signals start getting ignored, that's when you get cancer. And that, yes, absolutely is caused by mutations. It's possible for a cell to get into that state without mutations, but everything that we know about cancer says that that's a very rare event, and it's almost always mutations.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to take the last most important question here. Now we are really galvanizing, and we really want to do the work here in this continent. So if Africa could lead in one specific area of longevity research, be it stem cell banking, biodiversity-based compounds, or biomarker mapping, what would you recommend as the strategic entry points that could change the global narrative?
It's actually a really difficult question. And because it's a difficult question, I would say it's the wrong question. I would say that the right thing to do is to attack all of these avenues simultaneously, because the challenge is to identify the right collaborators, the right global cooperation around the world. And that's a process of persuasion and, incentivization and so on. And you never know what's going to work most easily. In my work, I have been dependent on philanthropy. I have run my various organizations focused on getting people to give me money. And especially for the big donors, you never know when it's going to work. So I just spend my time, going and doing as many conferences and podcasts and so on as I possibly can, getting in the face of people who can write big checks. And also, of course, getting on the front of magazines and so on. I never know what's going to work. I just, it's kind of scattergun approach. I just give myself the best chance. And I think that's also the right answer for your question, that one should not prioritize any of the particular things you mentioned in advance, because they all have great value, and you just don't know which one is going to come to fruition soonest.
Okay. Since we're going to play that card, and we start reaching out to private and public sector. And I've watched you negotiate. I've watched you talk to people. You're very strong with your arguments. So if you were to advise African governments directly, what policy framework should they begin developing today to prepare for the integration of longevity medicine over the next decades? That's the last question. Thank you.
I would say there are two main things. The first one is the same priority that you guys at Afrolongevity have chosen, which is education. The best way to make any country effective and important as a contributor to any global mission is to make sure that they know stuff, that they are able to converse intelligently with people from the rest of the world. The second thing I would say is to identify the weak links that exist in the rest of the world. And I touched on probably the single biggest one earlier on, the fact that the regulatory regimes that exist in the West and in the industrialized world are excessively risk averse. They are in desperate need of modernization to give greater priority to preventative medicine. And the problem with any system that's been around for a really long time is that there are people with vested interests in keeping it the way it is. Even if those vested interests are very narrow and they could easily be overcome with concerted effort, nevertheless, they are not overcome. So countries that do not have that inertia built in, that are in a position to develop their own regulatory systems from the ground up, they have an advantage of being able to do it right and not to be weighed down by history. So I would say developing a modern, a sensible regulatory regime, perhaps one that is unified across the whole of Africa, but not necessarily, would be a huge way for governments to start benefiting. And of course, they can start benefiting really early because they will be able to take advantage of investment opportunities from the West. I can use one example, which is Australia. Australia obviously is not an African country. It's not a developing country. But several years ago, Australia made a strategic decision to develop a regulatory regime that was very attractive for clinical trials, for early stage clinical trials. And sure enough, a huge proportion of clinical trials around the world are now happening in Australia. Now, Africa could do the exact same thing, but perhaps even more so, because Africa has less baggage, less inertia.
Okay, thank you so much. Austin, you asked your last question before Dr. Obani give us the closing remarks. Yeah, Austin, please make it
Good
snappy.
evening, Professor Gray. I've been a keen listener to your program. I watched your podcast with Dr. Sinclair. I've been following you for a very long time now. And the question now is, how soon can we actually get either a therapy or a procedure that will actually slow down aging as we anticipate?
Yeah, of course, that's a very common question. Everyone wants it as soon as possible, and so do I. But this is pioneering technology. So, kind of by definition, we can only give an estimate, a probabilistic estimate. My estimate is that we have a 50% chance of getting aging under really comprehensive medical control within the next 12 to 15 years. But of course, I could be wrong. There may be at least a 5% chance that we won't get there for 100 years. That doesn't bother me. A 50% chance is quite enough to be worth fighting for.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Like, I really appreciate the time, the patience, irrespective of the level of the question, and you've taken your time to address all the question, treating it as urgent and important question. So we really galvanizing, as I mentioned, this is the first time we started this grassroots type of movement. We've been doing Afrolongevity, but just last month we started the movement aspect of it, and in just that last month till now, we have over 350 active members, and they've been proactive, and these are people working. Sometimes there won't be chance, but they are really committed. So we want to start something really meaningful. We have people, clinicians, we have medical doctors here, we have researchers, we have undergraduates too. So thank you so much, Aubrey. Dr. Obani, over to you if you're there.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great session. I am very happy that so many people attended, and I look forward to continuing to work with Afrolongevity going forward. It's a wonderful organization. I'll leave you now. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye for now.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Bani, continue.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening all. And I want to thank Professor Aubrey for this wonderful, insightful talk and session. One thing I can get and take away from this today's day 3 session is that we shouldn't, if I have to be correct, maybe I stand to be corrected, that aging should not be seen as a disease, but as a medical problem. But one thing I wanted to ask Prof, and probably Osinaka-Chukwu can also answer it if Prof has left us, is since we know that aging is multifactorial, and do we think there will be in the coming future, in the near future, considering all the other lectures we had, that there will be one wonder pill that will take care of this medical problem? Did you get that?
I think I don't actually agree with Aubrey with regards to that. It has been a debate between these two strong pillars in the field. David Sinclair would say that, yeah, aging is a disease, and as a disease is treatable, right? And they worked hard with Aubrey because Aubrey is very persuasive. He got the Aubrey, he got the funds, he got the magic, and then he was able to influence the World Health Organization. But some institutions fought back. So the pushback was what led to the declassification of aging as a disease. So, but he realized that most people sees it as ageism. And what he did was to push back, to change. If you listen very well, I said his definition of aging changed. So he changed to said it's a medical condition. And because his background is from computer science, he uses bioengineering, saying that, if you say it's a disease, then you are saying that it's a worse-off treatment, right? So that's why my argument in my last post was like, aging is not a once-off treatment. Though I'm hugely influenced by Aubrey, I still have my own way of thinking and my scientific postulations to say, well, I understand that we are going to, but we can call it a procedure, you understand, a medical procedure or whatever. But for me, it's a disease because it's the main cause of other medical conditions. So, but he would say, no, that it's going to be complicated. It's going to be difficult for most people who are not in the medical line to understand when you say that it's a disease. They would say that I use it because most people use it loosely. That's why I focus on saying biological aging. So when you say aging is a disease, those who are under chronological aging, who must have aged chronologically, would say that you are saying they have diseases. Now, disease of old age is a biological condition. So that's why I'm also trying to see if I can get a particular professor of evolutionary science or biology, one of the best, Aubrey's mentor, if I might say, to come talk about the important question that people asked here. But Aubrey is someone that is a scientific rebel. He demystifies things and wants them to do something. He influences the scientific community to work. When he started the science, he said, and they said most universities said wrong. He started a competition. He set up a competition, $50,000, $100,000 to $20,000 competition to say any scientist or clinician that can prove this wrong, go with the money. So it got to a point where people started researching, and that's when I think he made a founder, the owner of Paystar, what was his name again? This US payments, yeah, it's where the guy that wrote Peter Thiel. No, PayPal. Peter Thiel and a whole lot of people brought him as a high priest of Silicon Valley to do a whole lot of research. But as you know, the world is, you got a challenge. When we were almost there, some women group came up with their strike, and it's affected Aubrey's research. Aubrey didn't do any research work for like 2 years, and the whole longevity community, because he was literally funding almost all the longevity communities globally. And after that, after the forensic research, they found out that it wasn't guilty. So I want to also tell us, clinicians, researchers in the Afrolongevity community, we have to be very careful, because there are a whole lot of blackmail. Once you want to do something very meaningful, people who want to pull you down, who want to sabotage your effort. People are using institutions as instruments to fight people who are doing the noble cause. And our beautiful ladies here, please do not make yourself an instrument of destruction. So that we can develop our model. If you listen to Aubrey carefully, was saying that we should find what we are going to give to the world, and not just the world always giving us in Africa. And which is why I'm passionate about evolutionary and genetic nutrition. And he agreed with that. We have this in Africa, and we must develop it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So it's a good night for me. Good morning, good afternoon. Do take care of yourself. Tomorrow we are going to have an amazing section. Like, each day is better than the other. Like, you can't afford. We still have a lot of people here in this system. I told them in the International Longevity Alliance, they said they have never seen an organized program as this in the history of the longevity movement. Put me anywhere. Go and look at how other countries organize, other continents organize it. They've never assembled the level of professionals that we've gathered for this complete 1 month program. Thank you so much. Do take care of yourself. Please ensure that you mark the attendance. We are going to work with it. Bye.